This Writing 1 presentation is about introductions, conclusions, and titles. Please follow along with this presentation by looking through chapters 30 and 31 in How to Write Anything. The paper's introduction is going to serve a number of purposes, and sometimes you'll even be doing all of these things at once. You can announce, preview, provide background information, catch readers' attention, and set a tone. And we'll be talking about this in our How to Write Anything book. We look at those words announce and preview, and many of you are probably wondering, well, what's the difference? So let's talk about what those different things mean. To announce, it depends on the rhetorical situation. Again, that comes back to purpose and audience. What that's doing is telling your readers basically where you're going with an idea, where you're going to take them. With often some academic papers will do that because they want readers to know right where they're going. They want to say, this is the point we're going to make, this is what we're going to cover. And that sets it up pretty well. Readers can follow that. It also helps them focus, and it simplifies so that they're not wondering of all the different directions you could go, where you're going to go. It simplifies it for them and says, here's where we're going. A preview, on the other hand, helps readers understand why an issue deserves their attention. So with that one, you might tell a story or explain the implications of something early on, and maybe you're not saying exactly where you're going with it or what exact point you're going to make quite yet, but you are previewing the general direction. You can also use that to highlight your research focus. So again, your readers can preview and see in general what your research is going to be about. You can use your introduction to provide background information. This can be very helpful for readers, and remember that some readers may know a lot about the topic already, some may not know much about it at all, and by providing background information you can bring readers to a basic understanding before you dig deeper into a specific focus. You can also give readers some information, background information again, things that they might know or have heard of before but don't remember the exact specifics. The example that they give in our book is if you're going to be writing about the BP oil spill, you might give a few sentences just to remind readers what happened, when it was, what the numbers exactly were on that, things like that. You don't need to go into a huge depth with that, but it helps them remember the things that everybody knew at one time. A good introduction will generally catch readers' attention as well, and there's something we call a hook that we think about. Maybe we're fishing, we're going to use a hook to catch something. So that's a term that you're going to use, and it may come up in your public speaking classes as well, the idea of a hook. And so let's talk about a few examples of those. One would be an anecdote, a compelling story, an interesting incident. Basically, that can help draw your readers in because they're interested in what happens to people. They're interested in specific stories. Surprising or intriguing facts can be very helpful as well. Sometimes it's nice to have sort of a startling, oh wow, I didn't realize that statistic. That draws us in. A dramatic question can help when you really make readers think, and that's where we get into also the provocative description or quotation. Bringing something in, whether it's a question or a description or quotation that really makes readers think and really puts them into another mental place right away, that can be helpful as well. You can see some examples of that in our various sample papers. Your introduction should also set a tone, and you can see in the slide that I've used some pictures of our Ancilla College cheerleaders from a few years ago, because for a game, they set a tone, right? They help cheer on the team. Sometimes when the game hasn't even begun, and maybe it's not a game where there's a huge amount of anticipation ahead of time, it's just another game, they're going to set a tone. They're going to get the crowd excited. They're going to get people focused on the game as opposed to eating their hot dogs out there. So you want to do that with your paper as well. You want to be kind of a cheerleader, get your readers seeing what's going to happen in the paper, of course, but also set a tone so they are sort of feeling it along with you. So you can embrace your audience through language. In other words, if you're using language that's a little bit more excited, if you're using academic language that focuses more of a scholarly research angle on it, if you're using language for your readers that is hard for them to understand, that's a negative thing. That's going to set a negative tone. If you're using a lot of slang or conversational language, that sets a tone as well. So you want to think about that. Your tone also is going to show your credibility, because again, if you're setting your tone as someone who knows a lot and is passionate about this, and as someone who is scholarly about it, that sets a credible tone for your paper. People will believe you more if you present yourself that way early on. And you also want to be professional in the way that you come across. In other words, you're not saying outrageous things. Yes, you want to catch readers' attention. Yes, you want to say provocative things sometimes, but you want to be professional in the way that you do that. You don't want to start off by over-exaggerating or using a word that we call hyperbole. You want readers to see you as being professional and, again, credible. When you go to write your conclusion, you have a few different strategies you can follow. And again, this is all going to depend on what your purpose for the paper is, what you really want to accomplish with it. It's pretty standard to briefly summarize and connect your points. There you're going to remind your readers of what you wrote. You're going to remind them of the major points that you had to make. And again, show them any connections and maybe how things relate again. Sometimes the conclusion is where you reveal your real point. And this is popular with argument papers sometimes, because your reader wasn't ready for your major point, your major confrontation that you needed to make. They weren't ready for that in the introduction. They weren't ready for that even halfway through the paper. They had to follow you along. You wanted to really set them up for it, so you're going to bring that in at the conclusion. Oftentimes, a conclusion is going to propose a course of action or more research. And that's a good thing to do as well, because you've presented lots of information. You presented maybe a solid argument. And now in your conclusion, you're going to say, okay, because of this, here's what we need to do. Here's what you need to do. Maybe you're writing a paper about driving and texting, and you're going to say, okay, here's the law that we need to pass to help with this. Or maybe here's what the readers need to do. Sometimes you're going to basically get to the end of the paper and say, you know what, this is interesting. This is an important topic. You've seen where I want to go with it, but we really need more research to see what needs to happen with this before we can say for sure we should do something. You can also discuss your topic's wider significance or implications. What that means is, why does this matter? And hopefully you've shown that to your readers before the conclusion, why something matters. But you might be talking about, again, driving and texting perhaps. You're going to explain why it matters that people not drive and text. You're going to talk about the potential results of all this texting and driving. So you can sometimes even bring that extra little bit more research at the end to bring that in as well. Sometimes you want to, again, say we need more research on this, or pose a specific question for that research, that future study. And we can see in our Ruskowicz book, How to Write Anything, lots of examples there for conclusions. I find it best to let students kind of go through and read those and see what works for them and take some time to really chew those over. So make sure you look at those pages on 425 through 427 to see the different styles and to see what you might want to choose for your own papers. When you're trying to come up for a good title for your paper, you want to keep a few things in mind. For me personally, when I write things, titles are really difficult for me, and it's because I overthink them. I want to come up with a perfect, classy, controversial, thoughtful, creative title that just blows everybody away, and everyone says, oh, that's an amazing paper, and I don't even have to read it because the title was just that fantastic. So I understand that sometimes we feel a little bit of pressure when we're trying to come up with a title. Here's some hints to help you with that. A title should provide focus. So your paper is going to cover all kinds of ground, and you're going to support your points well and all of that. Well, the title really needs to focus your readers toward what your ideas are. So the example they have on the bottom of the page in first page of chapter 34 there in your How to Write Anything book is they say titles for academic papers need only to be descriptive. So it doesn't need to be crazy, controversial or anything like that. In fact, sometimes people are turned off when it's a little bit too cute. We'll get to that in a second. So you can see their examples that they have down on there. They're just describing what it's about. They're not the most intriguing titles, but they tell what it's basically going to be about. You want to be specific but not confusing, so use some specific terms. What I often suggest is go back and look through your paper and see if there were key terms that you used quite a bit, and often those will help you come up with the title. You can use those key terms in the title. Then you want to be interesting but not too cute or suggestive, and sometimes students will come up with titles and I'll have no idea what the paper is about. the title is really clever, but sometimes it's a little bit too cute, and you think it's funny, or you think it's really clever, but your readers might be really turned off by it and think it's kind of dumb, or it doesn't reflect the paper at all. And then for the title, of course, you want to follow conventions for capitalization and punctuation. That's going to be a little bit depending on what you're using, your MLA or APA format. So be sure to check those guidelines for your titles. In thinking about your introduction, your conclusion, your title, we all have different strategies for when we write those. And hopefully throughout the various presentations that I've given, I've helped you understand that it's not a great idea to just think that you can sit down and say, okay, over the next hour or two, I'm going to just write my complete whole paper. Sometimes it's a strategy for moving past writer's block and just putting something down on paper, and then you have to go back and heavily revise. But really, good writing takes planning and writing in chunks of it. And so when we write our introductions, conclusions, that can matter and that can help us a little bit. I've found that great introductions are often written after you've written the paper itself. And that kind of makes sense, because if you don't know what you're going to write yet, maybe you've planned it, but you're not done, with the work on that, and you're still figuring it out, well, you can't really introduce something that you don't know what it is yet. And then that can also help you strategize your introduction a little bit better. So that's my suggestion, is write your introduction as one of the last things. And of course, you're going to write the conclusion at the end, but you want to plan ahead. You want to plan and find out if your paper is going to include what we call the great reveal. In other words, are you going to reveal your major point in the conclusion? Well, in that case, maybe you do want to at least plot that out a little bit ahead of time. You also want to think about your title early. Maybe have a working title early on as you're planning the paper, and then finalize it before you turn it in. Like I said, sometimes you want to go back and see if there's a really intriguing phrase that an author used, or an intriguing set of key terms that you used in your paper, and then you can base your title around that. So again, think about your title a little bit before you turn it in.